Hey guys, it's Jeremy here of Metal Music Meltdown, back with another video. What I have for today, guys, is episode 2 of my top 20 metal albums of each subgenre. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Definitely check out episode 1. It was thrash metal, which is probably my favorite subgenre of all time, so I figured I'd tackle that one first. And for episode number 2, guys, as you can see from the thumbnail, I went with death metal. I'm not the biggest death metal fan. I love the earlier kind of first wave of American and Swedish death metal bands. And a lot of the debuts tend to be my favorite from each band. You'll kind of notice a trend there. But there is a handful of bands in here. There's some really new albums that are on my list, as recent as last year or the last couple of years that are on my list, and even pretty high on my list. So don't be surprised if you see like an album from like 2019 in like the number 5 slot. These are just how I like them, guys. It's not the definitive list. It's based on how I hear the albums and what I enjoy the most. So let's jump right in, guys. Number 20. I went with the more local band to me from Hamilton, St. Catherine area, Ontario, Last Wretch. Really good, brutal death metal band out of Canada. They're on CDN Records. Love the label, and I'm really happy they signed these guys because it's a really good band. I'm usually really picky when it comes to newer wave of death metal bands. They have to really connect with me to really enjoy it, and this band really sounded amazing. Really brutal, just pummeling, crazy vocals, just a wall of sound and chaos, but in the best way. So if you're not familiar with Last Wretch, definitely check these guys out. Killer band. They have a new album that just dropped this year as well, but I like the debut overall the best. It's called Sadism and Severed Heads. Number 19, I went with the debut album from Immolation, Dawn of Possession. Really good death metal band out of New York, that first wave of albums. This was released in 1991. Really killer artwork on this one. Again, just a really brutal, really technical playing, really good musicianship in this album. And for Immolation, it's the one album I go back to the most. I'm not as familiar with their later material, so if those guys drop down in the comments any most recent Immolation albums I should be checking out, maybe. I haven't really followed them the last like 10 years or so, but I love going back to the debut. It's killer. At number 18, I went with another debut from Gorguts, Considered Dead. This was again released in 1991. Another great Canadian band, and they're from Quebec, I believe. But really good, more technical death metal band. I love their playing. It's nice and short and right to the point. It's only 37 minutes. But yeah, it's my favorite album by Gorguts. Canadian metal scene is pretty solid in Quebec. They have a really good death metal scene. And Gorguts was one of the great bands that came out of that scene. Really good stuff. And the next band is also a Canadian band out of, I believe, Quebec as well. Technical death metal band / brutal death metal, Cryptopsy. This one actually went with their second album, None So Vile. Easily their best album in my opinion. It's just so brutal and pummeling, but very technical, and the guitar riffs are so fast but technical. Really good playing on this album, and always been my favorite Cryptopsy album. I saw them live like, over 20 years ago, I think now, and they killed it live. Really brutal, intense band live, and I'm hoping to see them again sometime soon. It's been a while, but really good band live. At number 16, I have Legion by Deicide. This is their second studio album, released in 92. Some people, I was debating the debut. I really like the debut record as well. I think a lot of people would put the debut from Deicide, but I kind of prefer Legion overall. I think the songwriting is a little bit better. I think the production sounds a little bit better in my opinion, but it seems to be the album I go back to the most from these guys, and I love listening to it. It's a great album. Next one in line here, number 15, I have the Mighty Bolt Thrower, great British death metal band. With Warbaster. This is always the album from these guys I go back to the most. It's just the most concise. I think the songwriting on this album is really good. They kind of dropped a lot of the grindcore kind of elements from their earlier material, and this is more of a straightforward death metal album. And I love the artwork. Just killer album overall. Really good stuff. Love Bolt Thrower, killer band. Number 14, I went with the Mighty Cannibal Corpse with Kill, their 10th studio album, one a little bit later in their career. This is always an album I went back to. I think this is around the time period I got into Cannibal. And I kind of went back and bought up some of their earlier stuff and newer stuff as well. Really good band. They never disappoint. All their albums are solid. And I will have another Cannibal Corpse album on this list. But yeah, this is a killer album. Always go back to it. Really good stuff. At number 14, I think. Or 13. I have Obituaries debut, Slowly We Rot. I love Obituaries sound. It's just so raw and like slow, but still brutal and heavy at the same time. But it's one of the few death metal bands that really incorporate a lot of groove in their music, and I just love their sound. It's very different from other bands. It's definitely one of my favorite bands out of that Florida scene. Love Obituary. The debut's killer, and stay tuned for another album from them on the list as well. At number 12, I have the another debut album from the mighty Swedish death metalers, Dismember, Like an Evening, Ever Flowing Stream, I should say. Easily their best album, in my opinion. Really good Swedish death metal. I prefer the Entombed debut over this one a little bit better, which you'll see on my list coming up in a minute. But Dismember's killer. One of the bands I really latched onto from the Swedish scene, and this album is freaking amazing. Top to bottom, it's almost a perfect album, and easily their best in my opinion. And at number 10, I think it is, I have the debut album from Frozen Soul. This was just released in 2021, so it's a really new album. This is one of the new bands I really latched onto. I love their sound. Just really heavy and brutal, but it has a little bit of groove in it. The playing is really good. Vocals are really good and crisp, but really brutal at the same time. Love this album. Love their second album as well. But I think overall I like their debut a little bit better. But really good new band. Again, like I said, it takes a lot for me to really get into a new band, and these guys really connected with me. Well, and especially well enough to be ranked higher than some really classic albums I've already listed. So definitely check out Frozen Soul if you're not familiar with them. Killer band. The next one here I think is actually number 10. Another debut album from the mighty Autopsy, Severed Survival. One of my favorite album covers of all time. It just clarify, like it exudes death metal. It's just so brutal and it's frecked up looking. Kind of reminds me of Cannibal Corpse with the gory covers. We love Autopsy, really brutal band. They never changed their sound through the whole career. The last two albums were really good. They put two albums out kind of back to back recently, and they're both really strong. That's a band I have been following all the way through their career. They always stayed brutal and heavy. Didn't try to change their sound too much, but I love the debut. Debut's incredible. At number 9, I went with my favorite album from Cannibal Corpse, Evisceration Plague. Might be surprising to some people, but this is the album I always go back to. I love the title track. Do Decompose is really good. Scalding Hail. Just top to bottom, it's my favorite Cannibal album, and it's the one I go back to the most easily. So I had to make kind of the top 10 part of my list. Next one we got here is the debut album from Morbid Angel's best album in my opinion. It really cemented that death metal sound in that Florida scene. And I don't know, they're just, Death started death metal, but I think Morbid Angel's This Altars of Madness album really cemented that death metal sound to a T. Like they really got it down to an art. And that's why it's one of the greatest albums of all time, and I had to make my list. And a number, of course, I don't know what number we're at anymore, guys, but Scream Bloody Gore by Death. The album that started it all, in my opinion, the first death metal album of all time. Some people might say Seven Churches by Possessed, but this is my opinion, this is the first death metal album. With Chuck on vocals and doing the guitar work. It's just a masterpiece. It's a classic all-time album, and you'll see some more death on my list coming up. But I had to put this on. It's just so influential in other bands, and it's kind of where it all started. So I had to make the list. Number 6, I think we're at. I went with The most recent album from Asphyx. Might be surprising that this is this high on my list to a lot of people because it's so new. This was my album of the year it came out. It's that good in my opinion. 2021. It's just a killer album. I love it. Great death doom metal band. Really good variety on this album. There's a mix of like death doom songs, some straight up death metal songs, some straight up doom metal songs, and there's a couple songs that even have a lot of melody and like almost mellow death or traditional metal album elements in there. I just love this fucking album. It blew me away, and it was one of the newer releases that really caught my attention. It was my album of the year. And the next album is kind of similar situation. Number 5, I went with the latest offering from Horrendous, Ontological Mysterium. This was just released last year, and it's my 5th overall death metal album of all time. That's how much I love this fucking album. Love the artwork. It's just perfect looking. It's great graphic and artwork on this one. But this album took death metal to places I didn't even know death metal could go. It's just it's brutal. It maintains the awesomeness of death metal, like the brutality and the speed and the aggression. But they flow in they infuse so much melody in parts and some traditional metal elements, some it's hard to explain, but it's just ridiculously good. This album, if you're not familiar with Horrendous, check these guys out. Easily probably my favorite of the newest wave of death metal bands. Horrendous is the best by far. This album kicks so much ass, it's not even funny. Number 4, I went with Leprosy by Death, my second album from Death on here. One of my favorite album covers of all time, and it's just a brutal album. Not quite as raw as the debut. I like it a little bit better than the debut because it's more refined. Still maintains the brutality and the rawness, but I find the songwriting to be a little bit better, the playing a little bit better, and song structures again a little bit better. Just overall, a step up from the debut and a killer album. Always been one of my favorites of all time. Number 3, I went with the second album from Obituary, Cause of Death. Always been my favorite Obituary album. It's one I go back to all the time with Infected, Body Bags, even the Celtic Frost cover, Circle of the Tyrants, is really cool. Chopped in Half, love this album. So much groove, but brutal and kind of slow and dirgy, but still heavy and aggressive. Always love this album. It's a killer album, killer stuff. Number 2, I went with Entomb, Left Hand Path, the debut once again, released in 1990. Easily my favorite Swedish death metal album of all time. Just love this album, love the sound, love the melody in it, and the groove. I found the Swedish death metal bands incorporate a little bit more groove into their music, kind of similar to Obituary, but in a kind of a different way. Their sound is very unique. It's very distinct for that area. But I always loved Left Hand Path, always a classic. And for number 1, guys, I had to go with my favorite Death album, which is Symbolic. Third album from Death on the list. I think 3 of them made my top 7. And I love Death. It's my favorite death metal band of all time. And Symbolic is my favorite album by them. And easily the one album from death metal I go back to the most. I play this album at least once every week or two. Really consistently play this, and it's just my favorite album for a long time. So that's my list, guys. List down below what your picks would be for death metal. I obviously left off some big ones like, the debut Deicide, people might be wondering, or Suffocation debut is a big one I left off the list. But for me, guys, these are the 20 I kind of go back to the most. And surprisingly, a lot of really new albums and releases near the top of my list because I just love those releases so much. I just go back to them so often, and they kind of even overshadowed some classics for me. So let me know down below, guys, again, what your death metal picks would be. And let me know down below what subgenre I should do next. I might do maybe melodic death metal possibly, or power metal. Haven't quite decided yet, but give me some ideas down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep it metal.